I'm Claude Salhani, and this is This Week in Focus. Our guest this week is someone who really knows the Middle East, really knows Afghanistan and Pakistan, and all the troubled areas that we are witnessing in recent weeks. He's someone who has worked in the area a long time, almost 30 years for the CIA, now with the RAND Corporation. Dr. Arturo Munoz, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here.
Sir, in your 30 years in the field and now with RAND, have you ever seen the Middle East in such a mess as it is today?
No, this is the most instability that I've seen in my own career, or even, I do research also. I mean, if you look at the past, this really is the most serious period of instability that in historic times that I've seen.
Does it worry you? Do you think where's all this going to lead us to?
Well, unfortunately, I don't see a solution anytime soon. I mean, we have intractable positions. I mean, for example, if you look at what Putin said about Bashar al-Assad, it's the exact opposite of what President Obama said. And this is in the United Nations. This is in front of the world.
Right.
I mean, the President of the United States calls Bashar al-Assad a tyrant who murders his own people. And Putin says, hey, we need him to maintain stability. Look what happened in Libya when we got rid of Gaddafi, which, by the way, the Russians were against that.
Yep.
And NATO went ahead and did it over Russian objections. Now Libya is a failed state. So you can make the same argument about Iraq also, getting rid of Saddam Hussein.
So who, in your opinion, who would you say is in the right here? Is it President Obama or is it President Putin? Who has the right idea?
Well, I think they both have a point. I think Putin has a point, and I think Obama has a point. But if you had to pick which side I think has more merit, I would say Obama for the following reason, that Bashar al-Assad makes the situation worse. For example, and let me give you an example of what I mean. They have done interviews with the media, with the refugees that are sweeping all over Europe, trying to escape their own country. And a lot of them say, we're escaping Bashar al-Assad.
True.
They're not running from ISIS, although they don't like ISIS either. Nobody likes ISIS. But the one that is killing more women and children with the barrel bombs by conventional means is Bashar al-Assad. So Bashar al-Assad, is seen by the Russians as the bulwark of stability, but I think the argument can be made that he's actually fomenting insurgency by his excessive brutality.
Well, let's say the United States had a period of a window of opportunity a few years ago when Obama hesitated and failed to proceed with the bombing of Bashar al-Assad forces. And do you think we missed an opportunity back then when all the elements seemed to be in place?
Well, it's difficult to speak in hindsight because say that we had done the bombing. Then the question is, who would have benefited from it? Would it have been the Islamic insurgents? Then their advance would have been faster because we would have, to do the bombing, we would have to eliminate Syria's Air Force. So it would have been a serious degradation of Bashar al-Assad's ability to fight. And then the question is, at that time, who would have benefited the most? So I do agree with the point of view that we should have acted sooner. We should have acted 3 years ago. But in my opinion, it's not just bombing. You had to do a comprehensive program on the ground to train. You need boots on the ground. You can't fight this from the air. I mean, it's very short-sighted to think that we're going to achieve our objectives through an air campaign. You have to be on the ground. And we didn't do any kind of, and what I mean on the ground is not U.S. troops, not at all, but engaging the opposition at that time and providing them with training, providing them with weapons, but in a serious, meaningful way. and we didn't do that.
The,
And
boot-
I
the,
think more than the failed bombing, I think the absence
yeah.
of a strong effort to help the insurgents on the ground, I think that was the main missed opportunity.
Yeah, the boots on the ground could have come from a number of Arab countries, couldn't they? From Saudi Arabia, from the Gulf, from Egypt, maybe, from Turkey.
Well, that's exactly correct. I mean, the whole idea of U.S. boots on the ground is a non-starter. Nobody wants to do that, and I agree with that. You know, we shouldn't have U.S. forces there. But there are many other ways that you can exert pressure.
Do you see Russian boots on the ground?
You know, I think the Russians have learned from their own history. And I think, you know, you still have the generation alive in Russia that experienced Afghanistan.
Yeah, yeah.
So the Russians had the experience of Russian boots on the ground in Afghanistan, and it didn't work very well. All right. So what I think they have a different strategy. They're going to protect certain basic interests along the coast. They're going to protect the Tartus.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to protect their enclave facing the Mediterranean. Yeah. I think they're going to provide a lot of support to Bashar al-Assad's forces. But I actually don't see at this time that the Russians will directly take part in the fighting, because I think they know that could be counterproductive, and that'll just be a big recruiting tool for the Islamic terrorists. The infidels are in our country. And I think that the Russians, having experienced Afghanistan, I don't think they want a repeat of that.
Now, we have strange bedfellows right now in Syria between the Russians, Hezbollah, and the Iranians. That's a strange mixture.
Well, that is correct. And I think there's a danger in that we don't become seen in the Sunni world as taking part in the Sunni-Shia conflict on the side of the Shia. So it's a balancing act. I mean, nobody likes ISIS. I mean, these are people from the Dark Ages. I mean, I don't have to, you know, describe to you all their atrocities and all the things that the whole world is aghast at their behavior. But if we go too far to the other side, and we seem to be part of an alliance with Iran and with the Alawites against the Sunnis, well, that'll have negative consequences too. So it's a balancing act.
Let me ask you this: if President Obama came to you tomorrow morning and said, "You have 3 minutes to brief me of what to do in Syria," how would you advise him?
I would say, well, I would separate ISIS from Bashar al-Assad. Okay, because there really are, well, they're interrelated, and the two produced each other.
Right.
But in the case of ISIS, I think the great tragedy is that there are people willing to fight ISIS on the ground. I'll give you an example: the Shaitat tribe in Syria. I think they're part of the Shamar tribal confederacy, and they rebelled against ISIS domination. There was a conflict there over control of oil wells in the tribal territory. The tribes had always controlled those oil wells for their benefit. Now ISIS took over the oil wells. These tribal people were used to carrying rifles and being armed. ISIS came and said, no, we're going to disarm the population. The only ones that can carry weapons is the ISIS fighters. And then also the kind of Sharia law, the extreme Sharia law that ISIS enforces is not what the tribal society was used to. So there are many points of conflict. Bottom line is the Shaitat tribe rebelled against ISIS. Nobody in the world helped them. ISIS defeated them in battle. And then, to make an object lesson, they beheaded from 700 to 800 Shaitat men were beheaded. And I've seen reports of baskets of heads being carried around by the ISIS fighters. I mean, this is like the days of Genghis Khan. Mm-hmm. This is what the Mongols used to do when they took cities, beheaded thousands of people, and this is what ISIS is doing. Right. My point here, in response to your question, is if we were serious about confronting ISIS, instead of just air attacks, which have limited impact, we would have found the means to help the Shaitat in their struggle. And the reason I focus on the Shaitat is these are people on the ground who live there who want to fight.
So why
And
didn't
this is what we need to find. We need to find people who are there and who want to fight.
and why did we not help them?
Why did we not help them?
Yeah.
Because we don't have a strategy. We haven't figured out the strategy. I think the strategy that we have is very limited intervention
Yeah.
based on airstrikes. And we are doing the airstrikes, and I think that they have had some positive impact. I think we have killed some significant people. I wouldn't dismiss the impact of airstrikes
Sure.
altogether.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think when it comes to fighting with people on the ground, then it's riskier. And then see, here's the main problem of the U.S. is that we are so cautious
Yeah.
about making an alliance with the wrong people.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and now that has been even more highlighted by the recent experience of the people we did train, where if you've seen in the news reports, they turned over their weapons to al-Nusra
Yeah. Yeah.
in exchange for safe passage.
Yeah.
Now, in my mind, it's an example of too little, too late.
Well, we've seen this happen before. We've seen it happen in Lebanon when the Marines were training the Lebanese army, and they split up and went. Part of them went against the very people who trained them.
Well, that is the concern, and then that is one of the things that holds us back from wholeheartedly moving in to support people like the Shaitat. The other thing is, to support the Shaitat in any meaningful way, you'd have to have U.S. Special Forces on the ground.
Right.
And it's impossible when you're waging that kind of a conflict not to take casualties.
Sure.
Not, some of them will be captured, some of them will be killed. And then ISIS, the way they think, they would love to have a Special Forces prisoner. And they'll burn him alive,
Yep.
and then they'll put it on the internet,
Sure.
and everybody will watch it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the U.S. media will, of course, obsess on that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of the thinking that goes into this. Do we want to take these casualties? Do we want to take these risks? And obviously the answer up to now has been, no, we don't want to take the risk.
Exactly.
But the thing is, if you don't take this kind of risk, then you're not really going to get involved in confronting these people in a meaningful way. So actually what it boils down to is, how much risk does the United States want to take? And the answer to now has been not much.
But that will, in the long run, hurt us because they will end up coming to our shores.
Well, that's the argument.
You've spent a long time in Afghanistan. Looking back at all the efforts we've put in that country, where does it stand now? What have we managed to accomplish anything?
Well, we managed to accomplish a lot, and there's different criteria. When you ask that question, what have we accomplished? Well, there's the military sphere, security sphere, but there's also other spheres: public health, education, women's rights, and there's many statistics that AID and other of the international aid organizations, now they'll provide you with a whole slew of statistics saying, well, since the U.S. intervened and not just the U.S., I'd say Europe and Japan also helped. I mean, it really was an international effort. So since there was the international effort after the fall of the Taliban regime at the end of 2001, there has been a dramatic increase in health statistics that are favorable, education. The statistics on education are very impressive. There's a lot of positive statistics about socioeconomic progress. Now, the security situation, the political situation, that's a different story. And then the question is, what have we achieved in the security operation? And what we're seeing now is the question of sustainability. The U.S. military did push out the Taliban from a lot of areas that they control. Military, for example, to give you an example, Helmand Province. The U.S. Marine Corps counterinsurgency program in Helmand Province was very successful in driving Taliban out, for example, out of Marja and out of other areas, establishing local government, establishing local security. They did what they were asked to do. But now they pulled out.
Yep.
The U.S. Special Forces were also very good, establishing local self-defense forces. But now they pulled out. And then the question is, how sustainable is the security apparatus that the U.S. installed? And what we're seeing, for example, in Helmand Province, Musa Kala just fell to the Taliban. And there's other areas in Afghanistan where the Taliban is coming back. Now, of course, the latest headline is the attack on Kunduz.
Yep.
This is the first provincial capital that the Taliban has entered since 2001. And a lot of the reporting that you see questions whether the Afghan army has the logistical capability and the air support to continue the fight against Taliban. So the whole military gains that we achieved are very questionable now as to how sustainable they are. Did the foreigners do too much in Afghanistan and try to do too much collectively? And I would say, yes, there was too much money, too many foreigners. It should have remained more of an Afghan enterprise, because then it would be more sustainable when the foreigners leave. See, that's the point. You know, for example, with the Afghan army, the phrase was repeated during the days of the buildup. We have created an Afghan army that Afghanistan could not afford. And the Russians did something similar as well. You know, we in a certain sense, we repeated the mistakes of the Russians. Because the Russians were trying to remake Afghanistan too. They were pushing women's rights. They were pushing education. They were doing health clinics. And a lot of those efforts were lost, at the end of their intervention.
Going back to Syria for a minute, do you think there is a possibility of a repeat of the Afghan, the fiasco, if you want, of the Russians? If the U.S. does not agree with the Russians, would it come to the point where the U.S. starts arming groups opposed to the Russians, and then we get back into an Afghan-type situation? Is that danger there? Do you see that happening?
No, I think that's very unlikely, because we have been so reluctant to arm Syrians who are opposed to Bashar al-Assad.
Right.
And when actually there was a lot of recommendations within, that's been made public. The dissent within the White House and within the top circles of the administration over how soon and how fast to arm the rebels against Bashar al-Assad. If we're reluctant to arm the rebels against Bashar al-Assad, and we've taken forever to do it, I think it's extremely unlikely that we're going to arm rebels against Russia, especially if the Russians are going to focus on, if they're going to take a defensive posture. The area of Latakia and the coast, that's close to the Alawite section. Yes. So I think the Russians have a natural population support there, in the sense that this is a heavily Alawite area. Now there's, of course, it's very mixed, but I just over the short term, I think that's extremely unlikely.
One last question, sir. How did ISIS creep up on us? This is something that took time to organize.
Well, ISIS crept up on us because we weren't paying attention, but it was always there. I mean, these people are not even secret. I mean, they have been publicly making pronouncements and publicly stating their intentions from the beginning. They developed out of Zarqawi. Yes. They developed out of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And they publicly stated their intentions, and we knew where they were. And actually, the U.S. and Iraq killed some of the first ISIS leaders. I read a report recently that says by 2009, 80% of the ISIS leaders had been killed by the coalition. I mean, ISIS almost ceased to exist in 2009. Then in 2010, they reorganized themselves, with the current leader, al-Baghdadi. He really came to the fore in 2010. Yeah. But all along the way, he's been making public statements. We are going to do this. I mean, it's not a secret. Yeah. We just didn't take him serious, partly because of our great success in 2009. You looked at the situation; they seemed to be pretty shattered. Now, what happened was we began to pull out in 2009, and then he took advantage of that to step up his campaign. And let me add there quickly, ISIS. A lot of people just view this as radical Islamists. That's there's more to it.
Absolutely.
ISIS, part of their reason for their success is they have recruited Sunni tribesmen who feel persecuted by the Shia government of Baghdad, by Maliki. Maliki imposed disastrous policies, undoing much of what we did. He dismantled the awakening movement. The Sunni tribesmen that the U.S. has brought in to support the Baghdad government, Maliki and his regime, repressed them and arrested some of these people, stopped paying their salaries. So a lot of these Sunni tribesmen saw themselves victimized by the Shia government in Baghdad. That's one. The other reason for the success of ISIS is they've recruited former Ba'athist military and security officers of the Saddam Hussein regime.
Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you spending this time with us, and hopefully we are a little bit more aware of what's going on in this very turbulent region.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I greatly appreciate it.
Let me leave you with this thought today. You heard Dr. Munoz tell us that in his experience, for someone who spent 30 years as an operative for the Central Intelligence Agency working in the region, he has never seen anything on this magnitude of disaster, as we can say. The only thing I can add is that I hope this leads us to a better tomorrow.